Button. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm glad to see a lot of familiar names and few of my students as well in this webinar. And many of you are first time joining to the webinar. So I will take the liberty to introduce myself, especially to the newcomers and our organization as well. So, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Surbi Kumar, and I am the founder, and you can call me as a chief mentor, chief consultant at the Dreamcatchers. Let me tell you a little bit about our firm and how do we really help the students. So, we are an education consulting firm, and we are based out of Mumbai, but we serve students pan India through virtual sessions and even visiting the cities as well as and when needed. Our mission is to assist students in realizing their dream of obtaining quality and best fit education. And I want to stress upon quality and best fit. Now, you would wonder that how can someone really do that? What are the ways? What are the means? Right. So specifically for grade 9th and grade 10th student, you would agree that their immediate need is that they choose the right subject combination, they choose the right streams. Even I know the new education policy, especially for national boards, it's trying to move away from hard streams and giving some flexi options, but still many of the schools there is still like commerce, science, humanities, arts combination. And even in international schools, you can pick and choose your own subject combinations, but you have to even think of aligning with your medium to long term educational pathways as well. For grade 11th and 12th student, as you would agree, it's primarily which courses to shortlist, right? Which entrance exams to take, which colleges to really apply to. Okay, so specifically for grade 9th and 10th student, we do something or we offer services which help them make an informed decision in this space, right? So we start with a psychometric assessment. And for those of you who do not know what a psychometric assessment is, like it's a very scientific and standardized way to understand what are the aptitude of a particular student, right? And aptitude is not like really what level of proficiency you have achieved in a particular aptitude. It's more like what is your potential to understand the advanced topics, right? Then there is work interest areas and even personality types as well. But we keep in mind that it's just a quantitative lens and we are dealing with high schoolers, right? So it acts as a good starting point, because together with that, the psychometric assessment report, we also get a career fitment report, and that also acts as a starting point. Then, through our personalized and individualized career guidance sessions, which are like multiple sittings, we help the student take an informed decision, again, in terms of stream, subject selection, the educational pathways, and to an extent, career options as well, to a larger extent. And sometimes there is a need for preparing detailed action plan. It depends upon case to case, where we see that if we give a structured plan to the student and if they follow it, it can lead to their advantage in many areas as such beyond academics as well. Now, besides that, we also offer higher education admission guidance services and covering Indian universities and overseas universities, especially Indian new age universities, which has holistic admission process as such, where like beyond your academic grades, you are being evaluated in terms of selection process as such, right? So we provide profile assessment, the discovery and elevation services. And I say it as like elevation services because we try to kind of find out what are the natural strengths of the student and what are the areas which need some work if a student is eyeing a particular course, particular university, so on and so forth. When it comes to overseas, it becomes important that you shortlist the right countries And there are a lot of factors to consider, but we do provide assistance there. And course shortlisting, yes, of course. Best fit college mapping, wherever there is a need to for the student to write a personal statement, write or answer different essay prompts. We do not write it for them, I will be very clear, but we really help in different brainstorming ways and even reviewing their output and helping them put a compelling application that ways. We also help their recommenders if needed to put a compelling letter of recommendations as well, right? Scholarship guidance, if at all the interview process is part of the application journey itself, we help with mock interviews as well. Now again, if you're thinking of studying abroad, you have really got an offer, visa becomes a very important element, so we also provide guidance there. There are certain steps involved, and there is also like a document or a statement which you have to write even for visa as well. So that was about our services. I hope especially to the newcomers, it gives a context around how we are trying to assist students in different ways. And uh, I feel like we have been able to, with the minimum set of students or a limited set of students, we have been able to achieve that, and that gives me a lot of personal satisfaction as well. Okay, so that was about our firm. With that, let's start to dive into the session, and I really like to set the context first. And I think there is no better way than quizzing some of you, because it will let us know that what is the level of awareness. And of course, like as I said, that it's a Sunday morning, so maybe it might wake you up as well and make you ready for the fireside chat to come. So on your screen, you will see two questions now. You can send your responses via chat to me, and I will just take it from there. And Surya, you can also go ahead and put your response as well. Okay. We have a intelligent audience here. Okay. I'll just wait for another maybe 10 seconds or so. Great. I think it was an easy guess then. Cent percent, it's right. So, public policy refers to the actions, laws, and decisions made by government institutions aimed at addressing the societal issues and solving public problems. Yes. And of course, it is much beyond that as well, which I think we will uncover through our interaction with Surya or Suryaprabha as such. Now, second question is, I deliberately put it, and I know it was a no-brainer, but just keeping in mind the audience here. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, where I have made a small attempt to make the audience understand, especially like high schoolers. And yes, there are three parents as well. I believe like parents and the child is has joined through one link. Okay, so it is indeed an exciting time to pursue a career in public policy in India. You have opportunities across different organizations, different domains, nationally and internationally. And as you can see on the screen, like you can work in a government setup, you can work with an NGO, you can work with policy think tanks, you can be part of consultancy firms, even big fours, right? Which have been very popular, or in terms of like sought after uh, organizations, especially. Just one second. Yeah, okay. So I think someone was trying to get into the webinar and there was a hiccup. Okay, fine. I sorted it. So yeah, so you can work in consultancy firms. You can join academia as well, right? So the scope is broad. Now, in terms of the kind of roles you will get, of course, there are plenty, but you can be a public policy manager. You can take a role of a research analyst, a welfare officer, and so on and so forth, right? Now, in the next slide, I am just from my end, I'm trying to emphasize that the public policy, education, and the career, it is seeing an increase in demand. So what you see, it's a snippet of two news article. One is from the Hindu and the other one is from Education Times, where the Hindu article is trying to emphasize that it is the need of the hour to have the trained policy practitioners, right? And the Education Times article, it's trying to emphasize that traditionally it has been more of like, okay, this is a CSR department job, but the fintech sector and sectors beyond that as well are opening up to hiring the trained public policy practitioners as well. And with the advent of ESG, which is like environmental, social, and governance initiatives, there is a lot more demand. I think we have just gotten started and there is a lot more to uncover. So I hope this sets a good context for our fireside chat. With that, I'm very pleased to invite Suryaprabha to our conversation. She's an SVP with SVP Public Policy with Chase India, and Chase India is a public policy and advocacy advisory firm based out of New Delhi, right? So again, Surya Prabha, she's fondly addressed as Surya. So I will again take the liberty of addressing her as Surya, but I think I will give the floor to her. She can introduce herself, and then we can get started with the fireside chat. And I just want to remind the students out here, feel free to put in your questions in the chat box. If you want to go live, you can just mention and I will enable your audio. I would appreciate if you can continue posting your queries during the session itself. We'll try to cover as much as possible. With that, over to you, Surya.
Thank you so much. Firstly, glad to sort of be here and be a part of this conversation today. So thank you for inviting me. It's a very interesting opportunity because as you and I were discussing before when we got started talking about this webinar on how public policy as a space is not necessarily very well understood. And therefore, people have all sorts of views, opinions, apprehensions about it as a potential career opportunity. And I'm so glad that you picked this up as a point of conversation today, and excited to talk more through our session today. But just to sort of give a quick introduction, as I'm a senior VP at Chase India. So just to set some context about who Chase India is or what is the organization about. So we are, as she mentioned, a public policy advisory consulting firm. We work with corporates, we work with global and Indian foundations, we work with multilateral agencies, and largely our role is to really help all these organizations understand the evolving policy landscape in India and to engage with different policy conversations in a constructive manner, right? That's in a sense what we do as an organization. And we do that so that businesses are able to unlock business potential, and also for the foundations and other organizations working in the social impact space, that policy-led engagement is able to unlock some of those opportunities to be able to create social impact on public issues that impact our daily lives, right? And of course, what we do for different sort of sectors or topics really depends on the client's mandate and also how the different sectors are evolving in terms of opportunities and challenges within the sector itself, which then get governed by different policies and regulations. So just to sort of simplify that and give you an example, right? So in case if a company is working in the education sector, right? Our real job as Chase is to help them understand various government policies and priorities that impact the business of that particular education company. Right, so we really analyze how these different policies, schemes of the government, for example, the national education policy that you briefly spoke about earlier, right? How does that really impact their business, for example? Whether it has positive impact on their business or a negative impact on their business. And then we support some of our clients, as we call them, to build a strategy to advocate for any specific interventions that might be needed to engage with the government to, if there are any bottlenecks in that policy, how to sort of, find a way to engage with the government to talk about the issues, to find solutions to that bottleneck. Or sometimes, we also work where situations where a sector is very new, like there's so many startups coming up, so many new, sectors that were building up. For example, when we started work, earlier, when cab aggregators like Ubers and Ola came into play, there was no policy that was regulating cab aggregators, right? So that was a very interesting time for policy professionals like us, because that is about really talking to the government about why there is a need for a policy, right? Sometimes client wants to engage with the government because they want a policy which does not exist, because those businesses are very niche, those sectors are very niche. And sometimes it's about the government has come up with a policy, but that's not necessarily, it has bottlenecks in terms of ease of doing business for different companies, and therefore they want to sort of engage with government to see how some of those bottlenecks can be removed, right? So we largely work in this sort of intersection of business, policy, and society, as I always say, as a consulting firm. And of course, as a consulting firm, we work across sectors from tech, fintech, gender, climate, health, digital economy, and more. I lead predominantly a lot of work in the health, sustainability, gender, etc. spaces. So that's largely a quick introduction about me. And sorry, so just to also give a larger introduction to my sort of presence in the policy space, I've been around. I have a work experience of almost close to 20 years now, and a large part of that has been in the public policy space. But I started my career in communications, and we'll talk more about that as we go along.
Thank you so much. I think together with your introduction and Chase India introduction, you have already introduced the topic so well, and I think this is going to be an interesting conversation. So I'll skip a couple of my initial questions because I think a lot has been answered around it, but it would be helpful for the students out here to get an understanding of your career journey, Surya, and how did you really end up being in public policy space, especially at that time when you started with it?
No, that's a very interesting question. And honestly, when you sort of ask me this question, it's almost like for me to do a flashback from where I started to where I am today. So, so honestly, did I always want to be in public policy? No, not at all. Honestly, I never had that in my radar, to be honest, because when I started public policy, already I feel today it's still a very niche career sort of trajectory. But when I started, public policy was almost unheard of sort of a space, right? So I actually graduated in economics and followed with a post-graduation in PR and corporate communications from Xavier's in Bombay. And I dabbled with public relations and corporate communications for about 8 odd years, managing different corporate reputation for clients out of Bombay. And that is when, while I was doing a lot of work around messaging and narrative shaping for businesses, I started to really wonder that what really lies behind public messaging, right? What shapes the rules that govern businesses and for people to follow. And that really, curiosity really led me to the whole public policy realm. And interestingly, around that same time, the public relations firm that I was working with, AV&V, has a sister company, which is Chase India, which had just sort of started the public policy work. So it was a great, I think, sometimes you see that from a pivot timing perspective, it was a great timing because I was very curious and I had an opportunity to be able to move within the organization into a sister company, which was just starting out and also obviously dabbling with a very new space. So it was an exciting sort of shift I made. Of course, a lot of my friends, family, I was doing very well for myself in my public relations, corporate communications career. And then when I decided to move into a very unknown public policy space, my parents were like, what are you doing? Are you sure? What is this career? And, obviously the apprehension was real because that space was really unheard of. And so that's how I sort of chanced upon this. And then, of course, there's been no looking back since then. And I still feel like I'm learning every day. Honestly, the space has grown and evolved so much over the years.
One key message which I kind of found out from what you said beyond public policy as well, I think if someone does really well in a particular role in their current role, naturally the opportunities opens up, and sometimes you get handpicked for great initiatives as such, right? So that's something which I try to tell to high schoolers, right? So your careers are not like set in stone. There are no linear career trajectories, and a lot more will open up if you keep, yourself open-minded and do well in whatever is being offered to you in terms of projects and opportunities. So that's one key takeaway from what you said around your trajectory as well.
No, absolutely. You're on point. I think it was just my curiosity to want to sort of know more about the space and, or even have the open mindedness, like you said, to want to experiment with a new space. I think that's really what led me to where I am. And, that's what it's been a wonderful journey of learning, growth, and great success, if I can say so.
Excellent. Okay. With that, let's dive deeper into the role of a public policy professional. So, Surya, help us understand or really walk us through what's a typical day of a public policy professional, maybe from an entry level professional, as well as like when you have taken this trajectory, now you are kind of like in a leadership position. How is the day as such?
So I think that's the thing about, at least from a public policy consulting space perspective, which is where I come from. I think no 2 days are the same, right? I think it's a very, very dynamic, interesting space because typically, a person who's in this space is working on more than one or two clients. So there are really lots of things happening at the same time on different sort of topics, issues for your clients. So, but a typical on any given day, I think the starting point is really, I would say starts with knowledge, reading, and analyzing. So, catching up on news, catching up on all the policy developments that is happening in a
Yeah.
country context. And also remember that public policy in India is a very complicated sort of system, because there is also a central government driven policies, and then there are a lot of state governments, because a lot of topics or sectors are governed by state policies, right? So there's lots
True.
happening at the state level as well. So therefore, I think a typical day, whether it's at my level or the starter who's just starting out their career in public policy, I think we all read a lot. We have to consume a lot of information in terms of keeping, really ears on ground approach to track developments at on topics that are of interest to you and your client. So that's really the starting point. Apart from that, a lot of work, of course, because you're in a consulting kind of a setup. So a lot of the work revolves around engaging with your client. So how do you sort of on a day-to-day basis plan with your client on what are the priorities in terms of engagement with different stakeholders, and really putting together actionable plans, strategy on how are we going to engage with different stakeholders, what is the kind of messaging or positioning you want to go in terms of. So typically when you go and engage with the government, you have to really back it up with a lot of evidence, a lot of building proof points for your ask from the government, right? So, for example, if I'm going to a government to say I want some changes in the NEP,
Mm-hmm.
the education policy, right? I can't just go and say, oh, I want changes in this policy, right? I have to
Correct.
back it up with why are you asking what you're asking? What is the sort of data or an evidence that supports why this change is good for the government, good for the country, good for people, and good for business, right? So,
Correct.
so a lot of work really goes in the background to do that kind of research, building that evidence, engaging with the client to build on the strategy of how we are going to engage, who are we going to engage. So that's typically a lot of the day's work. And then, of course, engaging with the government itself or different stakeholders. And sometimes the engagement for policy led advocacy work or shaping work does not just limit to government, right? So, for example, there could be a lot of other opinion leaders, influencers who are taken very, very seriously in a context of a particular topic, right? So there could be academicians, there could be civil society groups, there could be think tanks, a whole lot of actors who have a point of view on a particular policy, and they all become therefore important to engage with when you have to actually move the needle on a policy topic, right? So therefore really planning that strategy and engaging with those stakeholders, supporting your client in meeting with those people, etc. And of course supporting that with a lot of writing policy briefs, doing research, is typically what a day looks like for most of us. Of course, for me at my role, because I am at a leadership level, part of my role largely is a bit more, 30,000 feet in terms of may not be operationally every day involved in managing this, but really overall looking at the quality of the work that the team is doing, mentoring the team members to be able to deliver good strategy to different clients. And of course, to network, help the business grow, etc., is also part of my responsibility. So that becomes my day-to-day sort of priorities as well.
Thank you, Surya, for that insightful answer. And I do have questions coming in from audience already. So Swastik, and this was actually my follow-up question as well. So Swastik is asking that I'm a grade 11th student and I have commerce with maths. Can I pursue public policy? Okay, so let me ask the question which I have, and maybe you can answer Swastik's question as well. So, what kind of educational background, Surya, is typically required for a career in public policy? And from your point of view, are there any specific degrees or courses which you would recommend that students who are interested in this field should pursue? And there is a third layer as well to this question: how important it is to have background in economics, law, or political science for public policy professionals. Over to you.
No, that's a great question. And Swastik, thanks for the question as well. I think it's a great question. And I wish that, more of us had access to it earlier in our journeys when we started, pursuit of this career. But I think the beauty of public policy really is that it's a very deeply interdisciplinary field, right? Which means there's no single academic background that is a mandate for this career path to be chosen, which makes it incredibly, in my view, it makes it incredibly accessible, right? So what matters really the most in a public policy career is your ability to understand systems, your ability to connect the dot across sectors, and to
Mhm.
think critically and analytically about people and problems, right? I do feel that that's like the fundamental of a good public policy professional. And therefore, if I just look at my own colleagues, my own team, and also the people I interact with in the policy ecosystem, they actually come from varied backgrounds. We do have a lot of people coming from economics background because policy does involve understanding incentives, trade-off, impacts. That we're having an economics background definitely is very useful. But
Yeah.
we also have people coming from political science background or law background, because then they have a lot of context of institutions, right, governance, and legal aspects of the policy conversations in that sense.
Yeah.
But honestly, we also have people from sociology, development studies, media, working with us and doing very well in the careers, and also people coming from marketing background or communications background like I did. So I
Mhm.
think, to be honest, it is, I feel, like a interdisciplinary field. So therefore, it's not very hard stuck on coming from a particular background is very critical. But yes, today I think there is a lot of opportunity for people like Swastik to really dabble with public policy by looking at courses. There are a lot of post-graduation courses in India, outside India. Like earlier when I started career, there were hardly any courses in India. If you wanted to do public policy, you would have to actually go abroad, study abroad, and then come back in, right? But today, I think India has some incredibly good colleges across the country in all the, you name the big universities, from Indian School of Public Policy to, you have also the IIMs, which are offering public policy course. ISB Hyderabad has a public policy course. So almost all big institutes today have, Jindal has a good public policy course. So a lot of good public, colleges today. In fact, Xavier's Bombay now has a master's in public policy. I think a couple of colleges in Bangalore have public policy. So I think today it's a great time for the space because a lot of institutes and credible good institutes have started public policy courses. So those become great opportunities for people, no matter what you pass out of, whether you do PCMB, whether you do commerce, whether you do arts. I think, public policy, like I said, is an interdisciplinary field. So there is a little bit of all these fields that add up to, because in the end, like I was, when we started out, we were discussing what is public policy, right? And I think one of the things that I always say is public policy is really, how governments make decisions, whether it's about healthcare, education, digital privacy, road safety. It just involves rules, regulations, laws, schemes, initiatives that impact our everyday lives. So in that sense, therefore, every discipline has some form of a role or interlinkage in some form or the other.
Correct.
So therefore, I feel like, there is still a lot of accessibility for people to dabble with whatever they do in their 11th and 12th and also for that matter, graduation, and still opt for great public policy courses that exist to do their masters and build careers around it. sorry, a long answer for a short question.
But I think you covered a lot of important information, and I think this is something which the students need to hear as such, Surya. So definitely thank you for that. And I have a question from Divya, but Divya, just hold on. We will be talking about that in like maybe couple of questions down the line. Okay, so just thank you for your patience, and I'll bake your question in. So we talked about educational background and what kind of courses and all. Also help the audience understand, Surya, like what kind of skills and competencies which are needed for a public professional to really like thrive in this profession as such.
No, I think there are a few core skills that we always look at from a Chase perspective, but also I feel it's applicable across the field in the public policy domain. One is definitely, strong analytical thinking. I
Mm-hmm.
think whether you become a civil servant and work in the domain of public policy from the government's perspective, or whether you work for a Chase or a Big Four like consulting firm, or whether you work for a grassroots organization which is doing a lot of on ground public policy implementation work, right? It doesn't matter in which intersectional area of public policy you work. I think one skill that is a core ask is your ability to be an analytical thinker, right? To be able to, and because public policy is nothing much but problem solving, and therefore to problem solve, I think it's very critical that you have strong analytical thinking. The second and very important skill, I think, is also excellent written and spoken communication skills, because again, in a public policy context, a lot of the work that you do is about communicating a particular intervention or a communicating an ask, or working with, so therefore your ability to write an effective policy brief or write an effective sort of collateral that can engage with different audiences is very critical. So your ability to write effectively and to be able to articulate a point of view with different kinds of audiences, right? So for example, when you're talking to a government stakeholder, your ability to be able to make that topic resonate with that stakeholder, so therefore your ability to articulate it in the language that they understand.
They
Or when
understand.
you're
Yeah.
work in or when you're working with a grassroots NGO on a policy topic, then your ability to be able to talk in a language that resonates with grassroots people. And I think so. Therefore, it is very critical that they have strong written and spoken communication skills. Other than that, I think again, ability to work with diverse people, right? Your people skills have to be very good, because, like I said, this job, no matter what spectrum of public policy you're in, requires you to do a lot of peopling, as I call it. So, therefore, your ability to engage with people is very important. Um, Couple of other points. Sorry, just give me 1 second. There's somebody at the door. It's really awkward and
Sure,
embarrassing. So
sure.
just give me one.
Sure. I'll collate the questions in the meantime. That's fine. Yeah. Okay, Sanchit, I do see two questions from you, and that's also something which we will be covering shortly. So, Divya and Sanchit, just allow me like maybe 5-10 minutes more, and we will cover that question as well. So, in the meantime, I think, oh, Surya, you're back.
Sorry, I'm
Okay.
back.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's
sorry.
fine.
So I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah, no, that's
Just
okay.
a couple of last points. I think, at least in the context of a public policy consulting role, I'd say that people will have to be comfortable with working with ambiguity and complexity. It's a very fast-paced, environment, I'd say. So therefore, being able to work with the complex nature of handling too many people, talking to different diverse people, I think that's very critical. Last but not the least, I think no matter which part of public policy domain you work in, I think a constant curiosity to learn and adapt are super critical qualities to be in this sort of domain.
Great. Understood. So I'll move on to my next question now, which is it would be helpful again for the students to understand what is the career path of a public policy professional, Surya, and like what are the opportunities of career advancement. I know like there are definitely like hierarchies in couple of corporate jobs particularly, but let the audience know how does it work in terms of the advancement in a public policy professional life.
Yeah, no, I think I just probably want to take a step back to also give a context of which I know I briefly touched upon in my previous conversation, and I know that your slide also spoke a little bit to it. But I think within public policy itself is a fairly big space. So I think the question is also starts from what are the kind of multiple career paths depending on your interests that you can take in the public policy domain. So it probably starts with like if you want to work within the government, then you basically give the civil services exam to become a bureaucrat, because then those are the bureaucrats who actively engage in working on creating policies, right? They are the ones who are really making or writing and building those policies. But if
Like
you do
Niti
enjoy,
Aayog, right?
yeah,
Organizations
or
like
Niti
Niti Aayog.
Aayog. Yeah, they could be, I mean, you could be basically working in any of the government departments, but you'll be actively as a bureaucrat then working in building out those policies and schemes that we're talking about, right? But
That's
if
right.
you do enjoy research, then you actually could join a lot of policy research think tanks that exist in the country, some very, very good ones, very credible ones. And those become really the what you call sounding board for government and a lot of other people who take a lot of advice from these policy think tanks to get the research that becomes the foundation of decision making on which policy to make, how to progress on that policy, etc. So if you're more like academic in nature, who enjoys writing, researching, doing more academic kind of work, then a public policy think tank could be a great career path for you in that
Okay.
sense. But if you're someone who likes a bit of a dynamic pace in career with trying to problem solve across sectors, then a consulting firm is always a great option because it's very fast paced. It's consulting, so it's both from a career and that also sort of maybe as I speak about each of these paths, I also talk a little bit about progressions opportunities. So
Yeah.
typically if you start with the government and give the civil services, then it's a very sort of typical how you grow in the government sort of a model of growth, right? Which means it is stipulated by how many years you're a district magistrate, then how do you sort of grow from there to become a secretary and that pretty much is your 30 years of your career. So the progression is obviously not as dynamic as private sector, but of course the joy of working in the government, to be able to really be the uh, actual what you call fulcrum of policy making and policy change. Of course, that's a very different experience of policy career. If you're in a think tank, typically think tanks are, I'd say, more slow moving because again, it's more academic work, takes a lot of time, so not so fast paced. And again, it depends. There are think tanks of all kinds. There are big global think tanks in India or Indian think tanks that are global in nature, like something like an ORF is a very big good example. So some of these, think tanks that are big in size are, sort of they have great opportunities for you to start as an associate, but very quickly grow into, good leadership roles to be able to anchor a particular sectoral research and become sector heads within those think tanks, etc. And then, of course, coming to consulting, which is my sort of domain. I think, like I said, because the nature of the job is very fast paced, I think, therefore, growth and opportunities to not only when I say growth, I don't necessarily just mean monetary growth. I also mean growth from the perspective of being able to learn different things, dabble with different kinds of work within the policy advocacy space. So I think those opportunities are big and therefore become a very lucrative, I'd say, career opportunity to consider, both from a monetary as well as from a learning development and at how quickly you can grow within organizations, right? So for example, there are people who joined my team 5 years ago as junior associates, which means they were just fresh out of college, they joined us, and today they're already in a mid-managerial roles, dealing with teams, managing a couple of sort of clients on their own. So I think it can, for people who are really ambitious and people who are, like I said, very curious to learn quickly. I think there is a lot of avenue for growth, both from a designation, money, as well as opportunities perspective. Then comes, of course, grassroots, which we were talking about some time back. So there is also a lot of public policy work that happens at the grassroots, which is more on the policy implementation piece or policy monitoring and evaluation kind of work, which typically would be you working with an NGO, not for profit, which is looking at a local district and looking at, evaluating the effectiveness of policy implementation, finding gaps, and all of that information really feeds back to the government, feedbacks to other actors involved in that policy space. So typically, I think these are sometimes, I mean, it's a mixed bag of where you really are placed yourself, right? So, for example, I have friends who work in the space and they find great joy in being able to be connected to the grassroots, to be able to connect it to the ground realities of, you and me, how is it affecting you and me? Because they're seeing policy from the lens of that close to the ground, whereas I may be a bit far away from that level. So their satisfaction, of being able to really do the sensing of what policy is working, not working, is very true to its core, and therefore very fulfilling. But unfortunately, that this is not a space that is probably again, from a monetary growth perspective, a lot of the NGOs may not be paying well, but I think from a potential to actually feel the social impact of policy, it's best placed, I'd say. So it's your pick on, people choose, they want really fulfilling career that sort of, goes down to the grassroots to see what it really means to have a public policy impact. That's probably a great space to be in. And then, of course, lastly comes the all the big UN bodies, international foundations, all of those, which are like the UNs and the World Banks and the like, which again have a lot of public policy opportunities because they work at the intersection of public policy and social impact largely. And again, the opportunities there are, they might be much more slower compared to the other sectors in terms of growth. But then the growth could be incremental from the perspective of it might be slow paced, but then opportunities to not just work in India, but really because you're in a global setup, you have opportunities to go to other markets, work in other markets, do projects in other markets. So those kind of avenues definitely open up. And last is really working in public policy in-house in a corporate, right? So for example, I'm using a Dell laptop. So I'm just saying that, if I'm Dell has a public policy team within Dell, right? So which does a lot of working with the government, engaging with the government on policies that impact Dell as a business, right? So those are also opportunities, just that, typically in my experience, these corporates, when they hire public policy professionals, they typically don't hire too many freshers. They typically would hire someone with at least 2, 3, 4 years of experience. So what often happens is people come join consulting firms like us or the big fours, do their first 3, 4 years of foundation building and working with consulting firms like us, and then sort of move to the public policy teams of different corporates and organizations. So yeah, so that's in a nutshell the avenues and opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. I think amazing response because you gave me and the audience a very wide perspective, and you kind of also covered that there cannot be one advancement trajectory given there is a broad spectrum of organizations you can work for, right? Secondly, you also touched upon the rewards, and I think it becomes important for the individual to decide what is more important to them at that phase of life or maybe overall as well. So Divya had a question around the salaries. Again, that was one question which I also had, like what is the, there are definitely multiple rewards if you can touch upon that, which you have already kind of touched on, but what is the monetary growth or monetary reward in this field as such? So if you have anything more to add to, maybe that will help Divya particularly.
Yeah, so I know it's a fair question, Divya, but also a very difficult one to respond to because of how broad the public policy spectrum is, right? So, because in a government setup, your salaries would be very different with a think tank, and and the spectrum is also very broad, right? It could start at a very low 30, 40K starting salary to it could be a 80K a month starting salary, right? So it's very difficult for me to give you a very specific answer. But like I'd already sort of summarized that I've already called out a few spaces where I know that the salary brackets are fairly, sort of compelling. But then I've also called out other areas where salary may not be compelling, but the joy of working in those spaces could be really compelling. So it really therefore depends on, at a start of, so the only point I'd like to say, Divya, is that, and it might sound very cliche of, all the older people giving the same yarn, but I'd like to just sort of double down on it, that at the start of your career, I know money is important. Money is important for all of us. So I'd be very, silly if I say that, oh, money is not important and you should focus on learning. No, I think money is important, and you should obviously, work towards maximizing monetary opportunities. But when you're starting out your career, I would just say that, don't keep money as your first priority or filter. Uh, you know, Typically choose an organization, an avenue of work that gives you maximum exposure and learning, because today you might start at a relatively, say, lower salary, but at a job which gives you great learning, great exposure. Within 2 years, you with that learning and exposure, you will be able to be greatly placed to negotiate a 3x salary in some other organization, and actually incrementally then build your monetary career trajectory. So that would be just one piece of advice, which may be very cliche, but I think it is still valid and workable in a real context.
Yeah, so very well said, Surya, and very pertinent advice. So, the way even I try to tell this to the kids, right, and the students, right? So, this is your first job is take it more as a training ground, right? So, someone is actually paying you money to train you, right? So, salary, yeah, as you said, it is important, but it should not be your deciding factor per se. So, thank you so much for that. Now we have touched upon the rewards, and again, from my standpoint, in any of the career talk, I try to give the students the perspective, both positive and in this case, like what could be the challenges as well, so that they know what they are getting into and they are well prepared. There are no like shocks or surprises as such. So, if you can also talk about what are the common challenges, and maybe as you have mentioned in the other responses as well, where you touched upon different organizations. So help the students understand what could be the challenges of being in this profession.
Right. So I think I'll probably start with my own space, which is public policy consulting space.
Right.
I think the biggest challenge in this space, I would be the pace of change and the unpredictability, which I briefly spoke about, right? Because,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll just give you an example to explain it. Because when you're working in a public policy consulting firm, sometimes you're working with a client on a particular policy for months, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
might suddenly get paused, deprioritized, or redirected due to a political shift, political priority shift, right? So that can be
Yeah.
pretty frustrating, because you've given months and years in trying to work on a particular problem solving on a particular policy issue, and then suddenly, because of political shift or priority shift of the government, that get paused, deprioritized, or even completely shut. And I've seen that many times in my career. So that can be really sort of sometimes frustrating and exhausting, to be honest. And the other piece in consulting is also that you often manage multiple projects and stakeholders. So it can be very demanding on your time as well as your energy. It is a job that requires, like I said, the growth and the everything can be fast paced. But then you need to be also very resilient, very detail oriented, and more importantly, very emotionally intelligent, right? Because when you are dealing with all kinds of people, and managing multiple projects, it can be a pretty demanding of you in terms of your ability to switch from one thing to the other, and to be able to really keep up with the dynamism of consulting workspace. So I think that, in my view, I've seen people struggle with. Again, like
Okay.
therefore, I always say that those are challenges that, and but I don't feel like they are challenges that can be overcome. Again, these are all things that if you really like something, you will probably find a way to adapt yourself, make yourself more resilient to be able to dabble with the challenges that come along, right? And now, if
Mm-hmm.
I just sort of pivot to the other pieces of work, right? So I think, uh, talking about working in the government, I guess the biggest challenge is cracking UPSC exam in itself, right? So I think at the entry barrier itself is really fairly big. Having said that, I think today the opportunities are not so difficult, because the government is also looking at a lot of lateral entry hiring across different departments. There are think tanks like Niti Aayog, which again does not necessarily, you don't have to go through the UPSC route, but they do hire laterally. So those are again opportunities that do open up. But I guess the biggest challenge in these spaces is the slow pace of growth because you work and grow in a particular how government may there is a system in which you will grow, so you grow in that system, right? So that's probably the big challenge. And of course, there are also limitations working while it's prestigious to be in the government, but also limitations in terms of how much you can do and how much you can't do, because you always work within boundaries when you work in the government, right? Sorry,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have to excuse myself 1 minute. Really sorry. A Sunday at home is always really difficult with the doorbells going off and I'm alone at
No
home.
worries, no worries. That's fine, Surya. Take a break. Okay, so Sanchit, I know you had a question around AI, so we will be covering that shortly. Uh, if any of you, if you would want to ask the question live, just let me know. Just put it in the chat, and I will enable your audio. But I hope the insights are helpful to you, and you can reflect upon it and maybe take it a step further in terms of doing your own research. Okay, and I do see Surya is back. Yes, Surya.
Yeah, so I think that was about being in the government and the challenges if you're working in the realm of public policy from the government perspective. In a think tank context, I guess the challenges could be that you're very working very limited in terms of exposure because you're largely in a research sort of a job, right? So while you might put together a lot of good quality research on a public policy issue, but beyond doing that research and making the submission to the government or the stakeholders for consideration, your powers are pretty limited in terms of seeing that actually happen, right? Because your job really is about just doing the research and leaving it for other people to evaluate and assess often. So therefore, because they're not necessarily all think tanks are doing advocacy work. So basically, where a consulting firm comes in is to really do the entire how do you sort of from a once the research is submitted, you're engaging with the government, build, working with them to find a solution, and then seeing that solution through is a piece that a think tank job may not sort of offer you. So you might be more academic in what you do, but not have a practical understanding of how things pan out beyond the research, right? So
Mhm.
that could be a potential challenge, I'd say. Then I think, again, on the grassroots NGO, I think when I spoke about it, I already spoke about the challenge that, again, for grassroots NGO related policy work, again, the problem or the challenge could be, and again, it depends on how, again, when I say challenge, remember that this challenge is very subjective, right? Because it could be a challenge, the way who you are and what interests you or does not interest you, that could really be the challenge, really. So, but at the grassroots level, for example, the challenge could be that sometimes you have a very micro picture and you're not able to zoom out and look at the picture in a larger sort of a context, right? Because you're just too focused on a particular area, a particular, constituency in that sense. So that could be potentially a challenge in terms of your ability to know about public policy only from a particular lens rather than a more broad spectrum view of public policy. And of course, again, when I speak about UN bodies and international foundations that I spoke about, again, the challenge there is, again, entry barrier itself is a challenge, right? UN bodies don't hire easily. It's a very tough process to get through. And also, a lot of them are always hiring only contractual workers. There are very few employees in these organizations. So you would get a 2-year contract, 1-year contract, 3-year contract. Of course, there are people I know who've spent all their lives with contract renewals and spent 30 years in UN bodies. But having said that, again, there's no hard and fast rule, right? I mean, it's a very contract-based work often, and therefore there's always I'd say, depending on how you look at it, but potential job security risks of, okay, after 1 year, what if they don't renew, right? So as long as you're
Mhm.
open to doing that kind of contractual based work, I think some of those organizations could be good. But also, again, entry barriers are also pretty high because there's a very stringent process you have to go through to enter some of these UN organizations, even on a contract sort of program, right? And again, in my understanding, a lot of these organizations may not hire freshers. They'd probably hire people with at least 2 to 3 years of experience at the starting entry point, if I could say so. They do, however, have interns. So those are, again, great opportunities for you to dabble with and
Mhm.
then sort of see if you build things from there. And lastly, again, on the corporate piece, I again spoke about, I think the challenge could be that again, it depends on who you are as a person. But for example, a lot of people ask me, Surya, you've spent so many years. Have you never been tempted to move to the other side, to be on the client side, which is to join a corporate? So I think, again, I'm a person, I like variety. I like the dynamism of, I don't want to be stuck with just doing, say, healthcare in a particular pharma company, right? Or I don't want to be stuck with just doing education by joining a tech company, right? I like the variety because now my portfolio spans across multiple sectors. I have like 20 odd clients working on different topics. So no day is the same day for me. So, and I think I like that dynamism that keeps me alive as a person, that keeps me going as a person. So I chose not to be there. So therefore, I think in my lens, therefore, a challenge of going to a corporate is you get sort of boxed in doing one topic, one issue in a corporate sort of setup. Which I mean, if that's something that you enjoy, then sure. If you, I mean, there are people I know that my friends who moved there and they say it's great because there's better work-life balance, and also that there is. You're just focused on one thing, right? But that's a matter of perspective. Like I said, I'm someone who probably look at it as being boxed, but for them, it's like great. It's stability. It's looking at one thing focused. So yeah.
And could it be more as well, like whether you would want to be a generalist when it comes to domain? Definitely, you will have to dive deeper in terms of understanding, or being a specialist if you work with like companies in a specific domain, rather like their public policy department as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think, the expectation is that if you're joining a, corporate and a particular sector, then the expectation is that you have the expertise in that sector or you have a better understanding of that sector. So definitely that is a thing. And, but again, I've seen a lot of my team members who joined us, worked with us for a few years and then moved out, and they've been, they chose to be, again, within my team, also in a consulting setup, you can choose to be a generalist or you can choose to be a specialist. So a lot of my team members, like I chose all my career to be a generalist. I said I'll look at four sectors, which means a lot more hard work because I have to keep up with four sectors. But I said I'll do it. But there were people who said I don't want to do it. I'm okay doing just education, right? So they've built within my team all the education sector clients go to that person, and that team looks at education sector, right? So there is a way to build that. But then I've also seen really smart people in my team who would have been a generalist, but then eventually when their career opportunities opened up, they could actually also jump to a healthcare, jump to a education, jump to anything else because they'd done three sectors, so they were fairly familiar, comfortable with three different sectors, right? So it really depends on people to people, but always I think having expertise on something, at least. So for example, even when I'm a generalist, I'd say I might dabble with five topics, but I know at least two topics I'm a super expert at, right? So you still have to be having some form of an expertise on one or two sectors, but you might choose that I don't want to be a sector expert only on one topic, but I want to do it on two, three, five. That's really how much appetite you have to grow. And yeah.
Right. So I know, Surya, we are like drawing close toward 12:30, but if you can stay on for a couple of more minutes, and if you have a commitment just immediately after that,
I'm,
that's
I'm, I'm,
perfectly
I'm
fine.
good to stay for another 5-10 minutes, no problem.
Okay, so I'll quickly move on to Sanchit's question, which was also my question in terms of technology. So he has mentioned that I love technology. Can I still be in public policy? And I'll put my question as well, which is, how do you think technology and specifically AI, which is the buzzword these days, will influence the role of public policy professional?
No, that's a interesting question because I get asked this very often on how do you think AI and technology will influence your career, your space, etc. I think AI is transforming all career or work areas, right? And that's undeniable. So I wouldn't say that there's absolutely no relevance or context to it. Because a lot of AI-led tools are helping us monitor public sentiment. It's helping us visualizing data from a policy perspective. It is, helping us build out some collaterals, memos, etc. So people are using AI tools to become more efficient. But public policy is a space, like I said, in the end, it's about topic that's affecting people at its core. And therefore, human judgment still is a very, very critical component of public policy jobs. And which is also why I feel that while, there will be certain parts in your say, and again, I'm talking in the context of a consulting job, right? Public policy consulting job. There will be AI tools that will come in to make your operational efficiency better. But I think the space is such that human insight, ethical reasoning, and contextual understanding of what impacts public, it's not something that AI can sort of really provide for, and therefore it will remain central to what we do. And like I was talking about earlier, right, a lot of public policy work is about engaging with different people, right? And no matter what you do, an AI is not going to be able to go, you know, have a people to people connect to understand the problem and solve for the problem together, right? So it might come in between to solve, come in between to ease the process of communication in some form. But in the end, I think in this public policy space, human insight is something that is so critical and core to this work that it's probably one of those fairly careers that are going to be fairly insured, if I can say, of how much AI can do or not do. And sorry, to Sanchit's question on you're interested in technology and can I still be in public policy? It again depends on what form of technology or what kind. Technology is again a very broad term, right? So what about tech? So for example, I think our country's biggest today, if you talk of, if I actually have to name top 3 public policy issues of today's country or global issues, right, is data privacy. The rules that are being, the data laws that are being formed by the government as we speak is a big policy issue to work on. And if you're interested in tech, definitely that's, personally, I think tech, and again, tech is today intersectional with any topic, right? If you like technology, technology can be agri-tech, technology can be gender tech, it can be any tech, right? So I think it depends on what do you mean by you enjoy tech? Is it about, coding, or what kind of technology are you talking about? But if you're talking about policy and technology, I think it is and it will remain an
He said coding.
Yeah, so then of course public policy is not your space because then you have to go to a pure play tech company to be able to look at that as a career path. But I was talking about technology from a policy lens, that how do you create public policy, laws, regulations in the country for ethical, effective use of technology.
Got it. I hope that answers your question, Sanchit. Let me move on to my maybe second last question, and then we'll see if we can take one more. So, Surya, are there any misconceptions or myths which you have usually encountered when you have introduced you being a public policy professional or in general as such?
Yeah, so I think couple of one, at least in the context of public policy consulting, there are a couple of typical things that I've myths or misconceptions that I've heard from people. One big one is that, oh, it's all about hobnobbing with politicians in power circles. They're like, oh, Surya, you're with this minister, you're with that minister. So how cool is your job? So yeah, so I think that's a myth or a misconception. Yes, we do engage with a lot of powerful people in the ecosystem, but then this job is just not about hobnobbing with, those people, because the reality is that most of our work is behind the scenes. We are researching, writing, negotiating, analyzing. So it's a lot of hard work, not always glamorous. But incredibly fulfilling when you see your recommendations take shape on the ground. So yeah, that's a very often I get told this. But yeah, so that's a misconception. The second misconception is a lot of times when you talk about being in a public policy consulting firm or an advisory firm, a lot of people say, oh, so are you like really the ones, the intermediary who's bribing government to do this, to do that, etc., on behalf of corporates? So again, the answer is no, that's a misconception. All corporates, including us, we have huge so for example, a lot of our clients are global clients. They all fall under all regulations of anti-bribery. So when we sign agreements with a lot of companies, we have to sign anti-bribery, all sorts of agreements. We have to undergo training for, anti-corruption, anti-bribery sort of things. So I think it's a very fairly, regulated space and a very watched space. So there is no wheeling and dealing of suitcases happening, and therefore this job is not that. So again, it's something that I hear often, and I laugh it off, saying that I wish, those were the days. But I think public policy has evolved a lot from, how it used to be, where, in maybe 20 years ago, they used to be called the licensing officers, and a lot of their job was this. So I think as a country, we've progressed enough to be able to cut out a lot of that red tapeism. And also as a profession, the space has evolved so much where all of us are bound by great ethical guidelines and sort of compliances that does not permit any of this to happen. So that's the other myth or misconception that exists, I'd say.
Got it. Very helpful, Surya. And I would like to close the session with one last question and also something more from you in terms of what you have been reading of late, or what's your favorite book and favorite quote. And before that, I know you have already, through your responses, you have already shared lots of advice with the students. But if you have anything more in terms of if they are contemplating to be in this career, what would be your strong advice there?
So I think three main things and then one supplementary thing, I'd say. So I think the first thing is stay curious. I think public policy space, like I said, I dabbled into it because of my curiosity, but it's a space that requires you to stay curious, ask questions about how things work or how things do not work. So I think that's one point. Secondly, I think reading broadly. And when I say reading broadly, I mean that not just being limited to reading about public policy from textbooks, but really reading more to understand geopolitics, to understand, politics, to understand government and governance, to really widen your lens of what you read and what you consume. Because in the end, like I said, public policy is about everyday life, and therefore to have a broad spectrum reading is going to be helping you become more knowledgeable and more aware. And I think being aware is a very key thing or a mantra for success in the space, I'd say. And of course, one very important thing is, and again, I say that very often to a lot of other colleges that have, engaged with students, etc., is that it's very important that you intern and volunteer before you make, sort of decisions in your career. And I
Yeah,
think when we were growing up, a lot of our schools, colleges did not, and these were not really options for us. Really, internship was not really a big thing.
yeah,
Today, I think it's a great, I mean, I've actually had students from schools from 11th, 12th come and intern in Chase. And of course, we've been mindful of how much they can absorb and how much they can't absorb. But the idea is that whatever opportunity you get, try to volunteer, try to intern, because it really helps you discover what excites you, what sticks with you, right? And that learning will help you also then make better decisions for your career, because that is an opportunity available today, and you should make the most of it. So, I've seen a lot of kids these days, even if it's a summer holiday, they actually take 1 month out to come intern, right? And it might sound very daunting that, oh, why are people doing this already when eventually kaam hi karna hai? But I also feel that, it's a great way to filter out what excites you and what does not excite you, right? So I think you should consider that as an option. And lastly, but I think more importantly, I think don't worry about having a perfect plan. You will, eventually your path will evolve as you learn more. And therefore, my earlier points that stay curious, read, intern, all of this will help you learn more. So that will help you then evolve on the path that you should or would do well in, right? So I think don't sort of get stuck to having that perfect plan in your head, because I don't think life's that linear or careers are that linear, as you rightly mentioned some time back.
amazing answer here, Surya. And through our career guidance sessions as well, we try to emphasize these important elements as well. You touched upon internship, you touched upon being okay with not having a perfect plan. Have something for the short term, but longer term will evolve, right? So great. Thank you so much for that advice. And yeah, as I asked around, like, any of your favorite book or what you have been reading of late, and one favorite quote which we can leave the students and like parents with. And 90% of the audience is still around, so I can say how engaging this session has been. We have overshooted by almost like 8 9 minutes, but still people are around and listening.
That's very good to hear. And so, coming to books, I think honestly, I have too many favorite books. I am an avid reader, so it's very difficult for me to choose one book. But I think a couple of books that really always will remain special for me. One is definitely Man's Search for Meaning. It's by Viktor Frankl, and it's really a book that explores purpose, resilience, meaning in life. Very philosophical, but very, very, it really picked my thinking a lot. So I think it's will always remain special. The other is because I'm a big nature wildlife enthusiast. I really like this book by Richard Powers called The Overstory. It's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel that talks about human stories with the lives of trees, and it's a very beautifully written book about nature and human and the interdependence in that sense. So it's one of my favorite books, and I always often try to go back to it whenever I feel like reading something beautiful, if I can say so. And in terms of a favorite quote, I think it also comes from the fact that one of the things I'm most passionate about really is seeing more women in leadership, especially in public policy. Because I do feel that often public policy decisions don't fully reflect women's realities, not because of intent, but honestly because of representation. And which is why one of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's quote resonates very deeply with me, which really says that women belong in all places where decisions are being made. And I think at Chase, I've had the privilege of working with some phenomenal colleagues who are women, from clients to government stakeholders to grassroots leaders, and who are really changing systems from within. And I think we just need more of them, and therefore I'd always advocate for more women in public policy, and hence this quote always remains special. And regardless of public policy, I think women in most decision-making spaces are very critical, I feel, and therefore this quote very special.
Thank you so much. I think you are an inspiration to many. And with your quote, I'm sure like females in the group, there are quite a many, they will feel inspired as well. So once again, thank you, Surya. Thank you to everyone who stayed on. And I am pretty sure that this would have been an insightful conversation. So if you would want to really be in this field, as I mentioned, right, after what you have heard, just reflect upon it, take it one step ahead, research as well. That would really help you all a lot. With that, let's close the session for today, and you can follow us on our social media handles. We try to bring in professionals like Surya who can share authentic insights about a specific career. So just follow us on social media, and whenever we are hosting another session, you will get to know about that. With that, thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Bye.
Surya. Bye.